Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, September 3rd, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about that game that went down yesterday. Florida State falls to Boston College 28-13. Definitely a ton to unpack because Florida State has a ton of questions to get to, that is for sure. Then we'll get to the winners and losers from week one. It's officially over, and there are a number of things to talk about. Some freshman wide receivers went absolutely crazy. Not too many upsets in this week, so definitely keep your eye out on some for this weekend. But then we'll get into the top 10 teams, what they did this weekend. There were a number that just absolutely rolled over their opponent, had a number of really good things, and then there were a couple that did not do very well, and I want to break down exactly what went wrong and how we can how we should feel about Oregon and Michigan going into week two. Then we have the week one whip around. We'll continue that. We'll just go around to all the other games that I haven't had a chance to cover yet. And then we'll finish it off with a top 12 Tuesday, where I'll give you my top 12 teams in the country. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of the chat there, that little $sign. You can click on that, add any question, any comment, any criticism that you would like to bring up on the show, and it will pop up on the screen. I can absolutely get to it. Sometimes the chat goes just a little bit too fast for me to keep up with it. So if you'd like to utilize that, please do. And also the GSMCpodcast.net page is up and running if you would like to use that as well. We'll do the exact same thing. But let's jump in right here because this one was ugly. Florida State falls to Boston College 28-13. Boston College obviously covers the 16.5 point spread going into this one, and it was downright terrible from Florida State pretty much from start to finish in this one. It was bad. They did not look prepared once again. They did not look like the team that wanted it more once again, and they looked like the team that was getting bullied on the line of scrimmage once again by a team that they should not have. So a lot of things to unpack from here, but overall takeaways, more than anything, I think the biggest question to me is just what happened? I have no earthly idea how that just happened last night because Florida State got pushed around in week one by Georgia Tech. They knew that their offensive and defensive line did not play as well as they needed to. They knew that they were coming home after a long trip to Dublin. Maybe that played a factor. Maybe the travel issues and some different things got in the way of those guys being fully focused on that game last Saturday. There was no excuse for this one. You were back in Tallahassee. You had your home crowd behind you. You were playing a team that was worse than Georgia Tech is, frankly. If I had to rank these teams, I'd put them around the same area, but I give Georgia Tech the favor here, and you got taken to the woodshed. There was not a point in this game where it looked like Florida State was in control by any means. It was all over the place, and it was pretty much exactly what you saw a week ago, which makes Florida State fans, I assume, just beyond angry. And I think you look at DJ, obviously. DJ had a remarkably terrible day. He missed a number of open receivers. He missed a big touchdown that could have gotten back in the game. The only time he did throw a touchdown was Portier just going absolutely crazy and breaking a couple of tackles and getting in for a score. So he was not good. And a lot of it does fall on the offensive staff. I thought the game plan, again, was not very good. I thought they did not put him in winning situations. But at the end of the day, he missed wide open receivers. He missed ones that pretty much every single Power 4 quarterback should be able to make. So a ton of questions around him. They didn't necessarily get all they needed from the defense either. The defense in the first half was just downright bad. There were a number of plays that were pretty basic. It was just a crosser over the middle of the field, and then they would release the running back out of the backfield on the other side. It was a completion every single time. It was an absolute layup, and they got a touchdown off of it on one of the plays, which was it was insane to me how little adjustments there were throughout that first half for Florida State. And then in the second half, they settled down a little bit on defense, but it still wasn't great. It still was Thomas Castellanos essentially being able to do whatever he wanted on that football field, and that falls entirely on the coaches. I understand the players are out there and they are not playing great right now, but at the end of the day, Mike Norvell, Alex Atkins, Adam Fuller, all of those guys know what happened a week ago. They know that was so embarrassing, that what happened against Georgia Tech a week ago, and they know that if they went back home and lost to that Boston College team, it would be that much more embarrassing. And the questions wouldn't be, what is Florida State going to be this season? It would be, what is Mike Norvell going to be as the head coach of Florida State going forward? And that's the same question that I have. I am very, very confused. What happened between them barely missing the playoff a year ago, getting snubbed in a lot of people's eyes from the playoff a year ago, and showing up this year and being just totally flat? I understand the talent is not as good. I understand they made some mistakes in the portal going out and getting DJ and doing that type of stuff. I totally get all of that. It doesn't excuse what happened. It doesn't excuse what happened in these first 2 weeks, because they are bigger, they are faster, they are stronger, they are more talented than both Boston College and Georgia Tech by a mile. But at the end of the day, huge shout out to Thomas Castellanos and this Boston College team. Huge shout out to Bill O'Brien for putting together a game plan that, while simple, it worked really, really well against this Florida State team, and kind of leaning into Thomas Castellanos' strength, which is obviously running the football. So a ton of different stuff to get to in this one, but the one thing I definitely want to jump into is just how Boston College was able to pull this off. I want to get into just where Florida State went wrong and where Boston College went really right, and the biggest one is just having Thomas Castellanos under center. He is a downright special player and one of those guys that you walk into the building with Florida State and it's not one of those games that is all that scary. Well, it's scary, obviously, but you don't have no answers. You don't have a guy that can't match up with a Florida State or a Clemson or a Miami later on in the year. So this is a very, very special player and a guy that opens so many different doors for their offense, and he did it on Saturday. I mean, 10 for 16, 106 yards passing, 2 touchdowns passing, 14 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. He did everything that you possibly could have wanted him to do in this game and was very, very confident in an offense that is relatively new to him. Now, it was relatively similar to what they were going with a year ago, but at the end of the day, it was really impressive what he was able to do in an offense that should be a little bit tougher for him to run. I'll be totally honest. Florida State was able to get home 3 times for a sack, but more than anything, you saw Thomas Castellanos essentially just running all over the field for much of this game. But the second part of this is just Florida State's dysfunction. I have no earthly idea how they're getting to this point, but at the end of the day, DJ was downright terrible, had 50% completion percentage, less than 300 yards, a pick, a touchdown. It was the same story as last week in so many different ways. But then running the ball, you ran the ball 16 times in this game, and I understand you were playing from behind for much of this game, but you can't put your guys in that situation. You know that DJ is not the most prolific passer in the world. If he's throwing the ball 42 times a game, you're not winning many of those games. Frankly, I don't know if you're winning any of those games. So it's one of those things where I understand you're down. I understand you have to find a way back, and I understand passing the ball is obviously the way to do that, but pick your spots. Be able to run the ball just a little bit more effectively, and they didn't early on. Ran for 1.3 yards per carry 16 times in this entire game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we talked about it. It was all over the place. There were open There were open touchdowns all over the place, and there were a number of plays that you look at them afterwards and you're thinking, pretty basic. It wasn't like it was overly complicated from Bill O'Brien. It was just a crosser and then the running back released, and it was that over and over and over again, and Florida State had absolutely no answer. So that's a coaching problem, but also that's a player problem. I'm not sure what's going on in those practices. I'm not sure how they're setting up DJ, but at the end of the day, it is not nearly good enough. I can promise you that. And then they took the crowd out of it pretty quickly. Boston College had a drive early on in this game, 14 plays, 71 yards, but 9 minutes, 18 seconds. An absolutely just grinded out, really, really tough drive, and they ended with a touchdown. Then they got a 3-and-out from Florida State, who actually only ran 3 plays the entirety of the first quarter, which was another piece of this, and then went right back down, scored another touchdown. And from that point on, the crowd was just not as into it. And it wasn't necessarily going after the crowd by any means, going after the fans, because I don't know if I would have been into it if I saw what I saw in the first quarter of this game. But at the end of the day, it was really, really a good thing for Boston College, because whenever you can pull a Florida State fan base or a Florida fan base like Miami did this past weekend out of that game, you're going to have a really good shot to win. That is the big-time equalizer that Florida State has in this, and being able to kind of take that out of the equation was absolutely huge, and those first 2 drives were huge in doing that. So Florida State did not do plenty to keep the crowd in it, that's for sure. They tried to have 2 late drives in the first half to possibly score some touchdowns. They had a chance to in a number of them, and DJ missed a guy, and they came up short on, I believe they got the ball on the 35 of Boston College. had to settle for a field goal. So it was just one of those nights. They had absolutely nothing going, and they were really all over the place in a number of different ways. So where do they go from here is the big time question. Where do they go from here? How do they bounce back? And we'll start with Boston College, because the ACC, as of right now, is in a position where if you have a win on your schedule, especially a conference win, you're in the race. There is not enough teams in this conference playing good enough football for me to knock out Boston College right now, or Georgia Tech, who just got a win against Georgia State this weekend. But overall, I mean, there's a couple of teams that have stood out. Miami, obviously. Louisville played really good football this past weekend, but NC State played bad. Virginia Tech didn't play well. SMU's looked shaky through the first couple of weeks. So there's no rhyme or reason to the ACC. There's no person that stands out among the ACC. So Boston College is in it, as far as I'm concerned. They play Duquesne next weekend, and then they have two tough out-of-conference games with Missouri and Michigan State. If they go 1-1 in those games, and then they beat Western Kentucky going into ACC play, I think they're in a position to make a little bit of a run. I'm not necessarily betting on Boston College to be your ACC champion or anything like that, but I thought it was really, really impressive what they did yesterday, and I thought Bill O'Brien especially was really, really good adapting to his quarterback strengths and letting him kind of be who he is. So was really impressed with what Boston College did yesterday. And then on the Florida State side, where do you go from here? Frankly, I don't know. I have no earthly idea how you bounce back from this, because this is not how they saw the season opening. This is not remotely how I saw the season opening, because early on in this season, I was saying they're making at least 9 or 10 wins in this season. I think CFP is very much in play for this team, especially the way the last season ended. You felt like they were coming back with a mission to get to that college football playoff and to leave no doubt. And now I'm having trouble finding 7 wins on this schedule. They play Memphis in a couple of weeks. They do get a bye week, so they have a little bit of time to figure out what's going on. But then you got Memphis, and I don't think that's a layup of a game anymore. I don't think that's a game that you're looking at and saying Florida State should be able to win. I think it's a relative toss-up. And frankly, if I was to pick it right this second, I'd probably go Memphis's direction. But at the end of the day, I will pick that when it comes around. But this was humiliating. There's really no other way to put it. The first 2 weeks for Florida State football were downright humiliating, coming off a year where you were inches away from going to that playoff. You were inches away, and frankly, a lot of people argue, including myself, that you probably should have gotten in. This is not the response that you want, because although it has nothing to do with what happened last year, people are going to use it as a way to inform what happened last year. So I don't know what happens from here. I think you play Memphis in a couple of weeks. Hopefully you get a win, you figure out what happens. But let's say you lose that one. Let's say they fall to Memphis in a couple of weeks and they're 0-3 to start the season, with losses to Georgia Tech, Boston College, and Memphis, where they should have been and would have thought they would have been 3-0 during those games. I think there's questions around Mike Norvell. I understand he's had an incredible couple of years, and I don't think he's all that close to getting fired by any means, but fans are getting restless. You can feel it. Florida State fans are getting very restless, and if they lose that Memphis game, there's going to be a lot of questions around Mike Norvell and the way that he's going about business, because frankly, if he wasn't as reliant on the portal, this team's probably in a little bit of a better spot, at least from a depth perspective. But all of this will obviously, work itself out throughout the season. It's looking to be a very rough season for Florida State, and we'll see what happens from here on out. But it's going to be interesting to watch, that is for sure. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the winners and losers from Week 1. A ton of different things happened this weekend, and we had some play callers do some really, really good things. We had the ACC do a lot of really bad things. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.